It was meant to be a normal day. Police Captain Marcus was at the park with his daughter Amina, 11, as he often did. No one could have predicted how their quiet time together would transform. Nightmare. Marcus unexpectedly left Amina alone for a brief period. You couldn't trust someone close to you, a fellow cop who was hiding in the dark. Unexpectedly, he approached his daughter and started a conversation that swiftly descended into chaos. What happened next will shock you. Continue watching this movie until the very end to uncover the shocking truth about what transpired. Amina, don't forget to participate and share your thoughts on this story. The evening sunlight. The sunlight softly illuminated the wide green lawns of the city park. Children's laughter echoed throughout the park. Captain Marcus Williams is a well-known and skilled police officer. The police officer left with his 11-year-old daughter Amina in tow. He extended his hand and offered a warm smile. It was a rare day off for him. He loved having these quiet hours with his daughter, away from the stress and interruptions of his tough job. "Dad, look at all those birds." "Today," Amina yelled, pointing to a group of sparrows eating crows on the grass nearby. Her eyes were sparkling with joy. Marcus couldn't help but smile at her as she took in the lively scene around her. With joy, the park was full of families enjoying the lovely weather. There were couples sitting on chairs, kids running through the playground, and friends throwing frisbees back and forth. Marcus loved having this time with Amina without having to worry about anything. Being a police captain allowed him to relax and temporarily become her father. After a few hours, the worry about his daily tasks seemed to have faded away. I watched her face light up with each new thing she said as she talked. "Daddy, can we sit over there for a while?" Amina inquired, gesturing to a comfortable spot in the park. Nearby. Her hair moved with each word. Her pure joy was contagious, of course, dear Marcus. I responded by lightly squeezing her hand. Then they walked over to the grassy area. They sat down and stretched their legs out. Marcus took a quick look around the park, with a rare sense of peace. It was like all the chaos in his life had stopped. The sun's warmth and the joyful atmosphere had replaced the daily work. Amina leaned against her dad as the sounds of families surrounded them. Initially, she took in the view before noticing a nearby ice cream stand where children were enjoying themselves. They were waiting in line, their eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy, could I please have some ice cream?" she asked in a soft voice. Marcus laughed and pretended to think about it. You did help with the..." He made fun of her by watching her smile and said, "I guess you've earned it." "Indeed." Amina clapped her hands, her smile growing even brighter. "You, Daddy. All right, all right." He laughed, got up, and brushed the floor. He must remove the grass from his trousers. "Please stay put. I'll be back in a minute, Amina." I nodded and eagerly watched him walk toward the ice cream stand, sitting on the grass, surrounded by the lively energy of the environment. She felt safe and happy. Marcus momentarily glanced back at her in the park, his heart brimming with delight. She waved at him with both hands, her smile spreading across her face. The ice cream stand was... He could still hold her even though she was away, just across a small road. Line of sight. Marcus joined the lineup and would look back every so often to make sure Amina is grateful for the ease and happiness of the present moment today. He was simply a father enjoying his child's ice cream. There was no stress or sense of hurry. As he stood in line, Marcus thought about how much he loved Amina. I didn't see the police officer walking around the area in a uniform. The officer was tall and thin. With sharp features and a deep gaze, he slowly moved through the crowd, his eyes focused. Sergeant John Dawson was looking at the people around him with a strange focus, and even though he appeared friendly and calm at first, There was something about him that seemed something that didn't belong in the quiet park caught Dawson's eye. Amina was sitting alone on the grass. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. A strange look came across his face, and he took slow, deep steps. He walked up to her, adjusted his outfit, and smiled as he said hello. From the outside, he appeared to be a pleasant police officer conducting a routine check. Despite being a child, his eyes revealed a deeper purpose. "Hey there," he said when he heard his voice. Amina looked up and saw the man. He was low and seemed gentle. This made her very interested. She didn't feel uncomfortable because she was accustomed to seeing police officers and knew many of them from her dad's work. Alarm right away. "Hi," she politely answered, a little shy. However, she was open to discussing what a young woman like you was doing here alone. Asked, pretending to be worried as he kneeled down next to her and kept his eyes on her. Her Amina believed him because he wore a uniform and thought he was like her. Friends of Dawson's dad responded immediately saying, "I'm waiting for my dad, he's getting me ice cream," but there was a scary look in his eyes that Amina didn't see. "That's nice of him," he said, voice soft. "You must be very important to him," she said. Amanda nodded, but she didn't fully understand. She recognized the tone of his voice, but as he drew nearer, she sensed something different. She sensed a pain that she couldn't quite pinpoint. She politely tried to avoid him, but his presence felt almost overwhelming, intimidating, you know. Dawson spoke calmly and said, "I could help you find your dad if you want." He pointed to the line and said, "Those lines can take a long time." Marcus had left, seemingly in an attempt to convince her that it was a safe place to be. Amina moved around uncomfortably and looked over at the ice cream stand. She could see her dad in line, but the crowd made her feel alone. She softly told him, "No thank you," and hoped he would get the message. But Dawson didn't. Instead of moving away, he drew closer and became silent. He said with a small edge to his voice, "Come on, now don't be so hard." That made her heart beat fast. "I'm just trying to help you," Amina finally set in, and she moved back to try to get further away from him. She looked at the ice cream stand again and said, "I'm okay." Her voice was shaking. Dawson smiled when he saw her hesitation and hoped her dad would notice. Even though his grip on her wrist tightened slightly, there was no need for fear. "I'll make sure you find the hidden threat in his tone, which was meant to calm you down." Before Amina could fully understand what was going on, Dawson, your dad, began to pull her away from the open area and toward his parked car. There was a police car nearby, and she could feel her mind racing. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't let her. She was scared and confused. The closer they came to Dawson's police car, the more her throat felt frozen. Dawson tightened his grip on her wrist. His calm exterior cracked just a little. Amina's eyes darted around. As she desperately looked for her father and any sign of help, the crowd seemed to block her view. She had no idea what was going on, and her fear only grew. Marcus, meanwhile, was now holding two. He turned back to where he had left Diana's ice cream cones. When he saw that she wasn't there anymore, his smile faded. His heart skipped a beat. As he searched the area for her, a wave of fear went through him, and then out of the corner of his eye, I saw a flash of her bright shirt as she walked towards a police car. It only took Marcus a second to figure out who was leading her in uniform. Sergeant Dawson was an officer, but when he saw his daughter's body, he quickly went from being confused and scared to furious. He ran across the park, dropping his ice cream cones in fear. His heart was racing. As he ran toward them, he called out, "Amina!" in a sharp, full voice. When Amina heard her father's words, she felt safe and frustrated at the same time. Flood her face as she tried to get Dawson to let go of her hand. Marcus approached Dawson, and as soon as he released his hold on her, her mood changed. Taking a step back as if he were shocked, his face changed into a look of Captain Williams. Dawson pretended to be surprised and said, "I thought your daughter Marcus saw right through her and helped her find you, even though she thought she was lost." As he looked at Dawson, he grabbed Amina and held her close. "Please stay away from my daughter," he growled, his voice low and tense. Marcus didn't believe Dawson when he put up his hands to show he wasn't guilty. He was angry. Marcus turned around right away and led Amina away, holding her close at all times. He held her close as they walked back to the park's main area. His heart was still beating fast from the fear of what might have happened. Even though he didn't know what Dawson was up to, he was sure that Dawson would not put anyone in danger. Marcus walked with Amina close by, hoping to see his daughter again. As he left the terrifying scene with Officer Dawson, a tumult of emotions began to accumulate within him. He was filled with a sense of dread, as he hadn't fully grasped the situation yet. He felt his heart beat faster, and his instincts to protect him flared. He knew he couldn't simply ignore what was happening. Even though Dawson's account made sense to everyone, something had just happened. Marcus was adamant about identifying the root cause. He led Amina to a nearby bench and gently asked her to sit down next to him. She looked down and gripped his hand, seemingly lost in thought, as she often did. The spark of joy and interest had disappeared, replaced by a quiet gaze. Marcus had some doubts and a little fear, and he felt awful about leaving her. "Amina, even if it's just for a moment," he said softly as he bent down. He lowered himself to eye level with her. "Are you okay? What did he say or do?" "That made you feel bad?" Amina looked up at him with wide, unsure eyes. She paused and bit her lip. She seemed like she wasn't sure what to say, but as her father's calm gait comforted her, she started to speak up. "He had just begun talking to me," she said in a soft voice. "At first, he was nice, like your friends at the station." But her words stopped as she turned away from her. Marcus's heart sank when he saw her little fingers playing with the hem of her shirt. Feel his chest tighten as he listened. He knew in his gut that whatever had happened was unexpected. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, telling her to keep going with what happened, sweetheart. He asked in a calm voice, even though his mind was rushing. Amina took a weak breath, and he said he could help me find you. I didn't want to leave, but he grabbed me. Daddy wouldn't let go of my hand. I tried to pull away, but he held on. Marcus felt a chill go down his spine as he listened. His instincts to protect him grew stronger. He had to use all of his strength to keep his voice steady. "Did he touch you?" Attempting to maintain composure, he inquired, "Is there anyone else nearby?" Amina nodded, her voice barely heard. He put his arm around me and tried to pull me toward his car. "Didn't like it, Daddy. I was afraid her words would hurt him." Mark clenched his teeth and made fists with his hands, anticipating a punch to the gut. He tried to keep his anger in check. This wasn't just a harmless act. I mistakenly believed that Dawson had crossed a boundary, something Marcus would never have done. "Don't worry about it. You did the right thing, Amina," he said softly as he hugged her. "I'm so proud of you for sticking up for yourself," Amina told him. She gave him a tight hug. She held on to him as if he was the only thing that could help her in a sea of fear and confusion. Marcus held her close, contemplating what might have happened if he hadn't looked back. He did it. He grabbed himself and took a deep breath. He knew he had to do it. Next, as they sat there together, Dawson's shape was already going down the road leading back to the parking lot. Marcus watched him go, his mind racing. Dawson's behavior had gone too far, so he knew he couldn't ignore this. He couldn't let it cross the line between work and home life. After a few more minutes of soothing, Amina Marcus got up and held on to the slide. As they walked back to the park's entrance, he held her hand, He needed to make a phone call and didn't want Amina to overhear him offering consolation. He glanced over her shoulder and instructed her to wait in the car for a moment while he took a quick look. Marcus took out his phone and called his mom to make sure she was okay. Lieutenant, immediately upon receiving the call, spoke in a steady, cold tone. He quickly described the situation, focusing on Dawson's behavior and how it had affected his daughter. His boss listened quietly, and by the end of the call, both parties agreed on what had happened. After the call ended, Marcus knew that Dawson's actions needed immediate investigation. He went back to the car and got behind the wheel. He looked over at Amina. He told her that she was sitting still with her eyes fixed on the window. He wished he could protect her from all the scary thoughts and feelings she was having because of what had happened, but he couldn't. He also knew she needed to feel safe again, and it was his job to make her feel that way. They made sure Amina was safe as they drove home. Marcus didn't try to get her to talk because he knew that the experience would make her quiet, had an effect on her, and it hurt him to see how her lively personality was tamed. Out of fear, he reached out and gently squeezed her hand, hoping that the move would help. He would comfort her that night as he tucked her into bed. Amina gazed up at him from her bed, her eyes still brimming with fear. "Daddy," she asked softly, "is that man going to come back?" Marcus leaned down and brushed. "No, sweetheart. I promise he won't come near you again." Her face was straight and curved. He told Amina, "You're safe, and I'll always look out for you." His words seemed to calm her, and within seconds, she fell asleep. Marcus watched her sleep for a moment and felt a mix of love, and he was adamant that Dawson would bear the consequences of his actions. Let anyone hurt his daughter or any other child while he was watching. He was about to depart from her room, gently closing the door behind him. He knew he would channel the anger that was still building inside him into the steps he needed to take to hold Dawson. When Marcus woke up the next morning, the events of the previous day were still fresh in his mind like a shadow he played with. Remember everything about the scary meeting with Dawson, Mina's eyes, how she had clung to him, and her fear. Afterward, he knew he couldn't just let it go, even if the police were being quiet. Now that things were moving, he needed answers not only to calm down, but also to make sure that Dawson wouldn't hurt anyone else. Marcus looked at Amina as she sat at the breakfast table and quietly picked at her cereal. Usually she would be talking. She left the room full of her boundless energy and interest. However, the silence between them today deeply affected him. He sat down and asked Amina, "Heart, how are you feeling this morning?" Across from her, she looked up at him, her eyes briefly moving over his face. I expected her to express her fear of Dawson, but instead she simply shrugged and made an offer. "I'm okay, Daddy," she said with a small, uncertain smile. Marcus tried to convince her that her voice was no longer bright. He told her that everything would be okay, but he knew that his words would not be enough, wouldn't change what had happened, and the only way to make her feel safe again was to make sure Dawson was held responsible for putting Amina off at Marcus skipped school and went straight to the police station. As soon as he walked into the office, he could feel the stress rising. Dawson's acts were under investigation, his lieutenant informed him. Marcus was impatient, despite the promise of private resolution to the issue. He needed to know what was happening and how to stop the harm as he walked. As he strolled through the station, he noticed that several police officers were already whispering to each other, their gazes shifting toward him. News spread quickly in the community with a mix of interest and worry area, and while there had been no official word, it was clear that people knew something. Marcus didn't display any emotion because he knew he was in error. He was here to perform his duties and ensure his daughter's safety, as he always does. When he got to his office, his lieutenant, a tall, serious man named Captain Harris, walked up to him. He clenched his jaw, demonstrating to Marcus the gravity of the situation. "Marcus, may I have a word with Harris?" Harris pointed to Marcus's office, and Marcus nodded. Harris then led Marcus down the hall and into the small, poorly lit office. As soon as the door closed behind them, Harris turned to face him. "Concerned, I reviewed the preliminary report you submitted last night." Harris began his Marcus. "You chose the tone perfectly, and I must admit, this is deeply moving. I've known Dawson for years and never imagined he would do something so wrong." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Because he was so angry, he didn't just cross a line, Captain. He used his power to scare and control a child, my child. And if he was capable of doing that to my daughter, and I can't even begin to imagine what he has done to others." Grimm looked at Harris and said, "We've started a full investigation, and we immediately placed Dawson on administrative leave. We are going to question him and see if we can find any proof. Given his prior experience, we can proceed swiftly." Marcus felt slightly relieved upon hearing the news, but he was already aware of this. Administrative leave was just the start. He achieved his goal of holding Dawson accountable for his actions. Captain Marcus said, "Thank you. I won't rest until justice is done." Voice, calm but tense. "Thanks for your help, but I also want to make sure as complete as possible. We need to look into his past cases and talk to anyone who might have talked to him, and there are a lot of them." Harris met his eyes and gave him a firm nod. "I agree, Marcus. We're going to dig," Harris said. "We'll investigate this thoroughly and find the truth." As Marcus left the office, he felt he was ready to do anything to protect his daughter and felt more determined than ever. He was determined to hold Dawson accountable for his actions, yet he also understood the challenges that lay ahead. The journey home that night was tough and full of problems he hadn't planned for. Marcus tried to hold things back for Amina as much as possible. They played a board game together, and he did his best. He tried to make her laugh to cheer her up, but she wouldn't laugh. She could still feel the impact of what had happened. Her typical joy had been replaced by anxiety. Even though he put her to bed that night, Amina looked up at him with unease in her eyes. She didn't know how to ask her dad, "Daddy, is Officer Dawson in trouble?" Her voice was barely audible as she delivered her question. Marcus thought about what to say for a moment. "Please be careful, sweetheart. He's facing consequences for his actions, and we're on our way." Amina nodded, as if she felt better, to ensure he wouldn't be able to do it again. When he spoke, she reached out and gave him a tight hug. For a moment, Marcus felt there was a slim chance that they could resolve this issue together, but as he departed the room, he knew the fight wasn't over yet, because he still didn't know a lot of things. He was uneasy and couldn't shake the feeling that Dawson's actions went beyond his knowledge. He was determined to uncover the truth, regardless of the difficulty. Marcus's days after that were a blur of worry and resolve. He couldn't wait any longer, and each moment felt like an eternity full of restless desperation. He needed assurance that Amina would answer for her actions and that Dawson would face justice. He would be safe from any more hurt, but every day that went by with no news only made the worry that was bothering him this otherwise calm afternoon even worse. Marcus got a call from his lieutenant, which he answered right away. His heart raced as he listened to Marcus, his assistant, speak. "I wanted to inform you that Dawson has arrived at the station. When they brought him in for questioning, he started acting strangely. We don't know what's wrong with him." Marcus got a chill. Dawson's behavior had already gone too far in ways Marcus could not have imagined. The knowledge that he was acting strangely made him even less comfortable. Marcus instructed him to keep a close watch on Dawson. He lacked trust in Dawson and feared the consequences of not keeping a close watch on him. "I don't want him near Amina or any other kids." His voice was tight. Marcus said, If you see anything fishy, call me right away. I couldn't shake the feeling that Dawson's actions were wrong. The disturbing meeting revealed a larger issue. Something far darker than Marcus had initially thought was now present. Because Dawson was acting in unexpected ways, Marcus felt a renewed sense of urgency. He had to exercise caution that night for Amina's safety. Marcus chose to take Amina for a walk to clear his mind. He hoped that the fresh air would help him relax. The stress that had been building up over the last few days was evident as they walked. Amina held his hand tightly with her little fingers as they walked around their neighborhood, wrapped around his body, reminding him of how innocent and happy he was. Fighting to keep them safe, they went into a nearby park. The smell of freshly cut grass hit them like a familiar wave. The scent filled the air, prompting Amina to look up at him. There was still a hint of worry on her face. Marcus bent down and met her gaze. "Daddy, will that man come back?" she asked in a soft voice. I looked at her with a comforting smile and said, "No, sweetheart. He's not coming back." Despite her obvious experiences, Amina nodded. She would never forget, and they kept walking with Marcus. He silently vowed to do everything to protect her, but as they drew closer, Marcus saw a familiar person standing near the park's entrance. His heart skipped a beat, his heart raced, and his grip on Amina's hand tightened. It was Dawson's Marcus who got a chill when he saw the smile on his face. He was wearing plain clothes and was calm, but not tense. Uneasy, Marcus felt a wave of protective anger build up inside him, but he kept his cool because he didn't want to scare Amina. Captain Dawson greeted him as well. "You're out for a walk with your daughter and I see such a beautiful view." Marcus walked with Amina slightly behind him in the evening, shielding her. He responded, "Dawson, what are you doing here?" in a cold, straight voice. Dawson's smile got bigger, and his eyes lit up with a twisted sense of amusement. "Oh, I see. I'm going for a walk myself. It's a free country after all, Mark." He could feel Amina's grip getting tighter on his hand, so he squeezed her back to calm her down. "Dawson, you need to stay away from us," he told her in a low voice. "If you approach my daughter again, I will ensure your capture. This isn't a game. You will encounter the entire power of the law." Dawson laughed in a way that made Marcus shiver. "Oh, Captain, don't get the wrong idea. I'm just enjoying the park like you are." Marcus turned around and led Amina away from Dawson and toward the exit. He could feel Dawson's eyes on them as they went. Walked behind him like a dark shadow that wouldn't go away, affecting every part of Marcus's being. He was yelled at to face Dawson and end this twisted game for good. But he knew he had to. Keep Amina safe, and making Dawson frustrated in front of her would only make things worse. When they got to the car, Marcus helped Amina get into the back seat. He shook as he held onto her, locking the doors as soon as she was safe. Dawson sat behind the steering wheel, his mind racing with all the possible scenarios and their implications. Dawson was cocky and proud. All signs led to a man who thought he couldn't be hurt, but Marcus was set on stopping him. Amina sat quietly in the car as they drove home. Her gaze remained fixed on the window in the back. Marcus glanced at her through the window. Seeing the fear in her eyes in the rearview mirror broke his heart. He knew this wasn't over, and he was ready to do anything the next morning to keep her safe. Marcus. When he got back to the station, he was more determined than ever, so he asked to meet with the internal affairs team to stop ET mining. Push for a full review of what Dawson did, he listed all of it. He was fully aware of every suspicion that had risen over the past few days. Colleagues attentively listened, and the shock and disbelief on their faces demonstrated this. Marcus echoed his own sentiment. "This man has crossed lines that no police officer should ever cross. I desire every aspect of his success, despite his calm, yet angry voice." "Checked out. "I want to know if he's hurt anyone else, and I want him to leave this precinct," he uttered, echoing throughout the room. Following a tense silence, colleagues nodded, and their faces showed that they were sure they knew what was being said. They understood the gravity of the situation and were ready to act, but as the probe went on, Marcus couldn't get rid of the feeling that Dawson didn't do it. His years of experience had taught him that the man was. As the days passed, the threat became more difficult to control. Marcus became even more vigilant, and he focused on protecting his daughter. The days after Dawson's scary meeting with Marcus and Amina were a blur of tense meetings, talks, and never-ending digging. The investigation into Dawson's behavior was now progressing. Marcus and his co-workers could see that this was just the start. The case wasn't just about him. I no longer had my own family. It was for the safety of everyone else. The internal affairs team's impact surpassed his initial expectations. Investigating Dawson's past revealed disturbing facts. His inconsistent records show small but clear signs of wrongdoing. This had been lost over the years. Witnesses came forward and quietly confessed. People who were previously too afraid to speak out are now experiencing discomfort and fear. The ongoing investigation left them feeling a mixture of emotions. As they listened to each new story and revelation, they felt relief and anger. Shortly after, the story became widely known, confirming his deepest fears. Stories about the investigation began to appear in the news, and Dawson's face became visible. Across the city, a story about a police officer abusing his power will play on screens. And going after vulnerable people really upset individuals, and it quickly became the most hot topic. Parents, campaigners, and concerned citizens used social media to make demands. Justice and advocating for increased control over the police force are crucial. Marcus was in the middle of a storm when the story got out, and reporters couldn't stop calling him. He kept his answers short when asked for comments because he wanted to find any new information that could add to the growing scandal. He didn't say anything that could harm the probe, but he did it behind closed doors. He was determined to seek justice and persistently pushed his co-workers and bosses to do so. Do something right away. One night, Marcus sat alone. He was going through case files in his office and says his mind is full of questions. He couldn't get rid of the thought that Dawson had been able to hide for too long, taking advantage of the fact that the community had placed their trust in him. But how many other people had suffered as a result? How many lives had been impacted by his abuse of power? A knock on the door woke Marcus up. He looked up and saw his lieutenant captain. Harris was standing in the doorway. Harris drew his face, appearing grim as he did so. As he walked into the room, Marcus Harris's voice became rough. "We've uncovered additional evidence suggesting that Dawson's record is superior to what we thought." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine and gestured for Harris to take a seat. His heart pounded rapidly as he prepared. Hearing the full extent of Dawson's wrongdoing, Harris took a deep breath and contemplated his next words. There were many reports against him over the years, but they were all dismissed due to insufficient evidence. But after going over the facts, it's clear that he was usually after young girls, especially those from communities that are weak. Marcus tightened his hands as he listened. No one thought to investigate this, as his anger was simmering beneath the surface. Earlier, he asked in a frustrated tone of voice, "How did he stay?" Harris, having been under the radar for a long time, shook his head and his face lit up. "Sorry, Marcus, I don't know the answer to that question. All I know is that we're currently taking this matter very seriously. We've already released a public statement confirming the probe, and our dedication lies in ensuring the execution of justice." Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of justice was finally moving, which made him feel both relieved and angry, but he couldn't shake it. He thought about how frustrated he was that it had taken so long and saw Amina's face. Once more felt a need to see this through to the end, and as the investigation progressed, the public's ire intensified, leading to riots outside. Community members holding signs that said, "Accountability and reform," were in the neighborhood support for Marcus and Eamon, adding their voices to a storm of anger and unwavering determination. The cops knew they had to move quickly because the pressure was building. Marcus received a crucial message one day, an invitation to speak at a neighborhood meeting by local leaders who wanted him to speak to the people to reassure them. "We were taking measures to ensure that a similar incident wouldn't occur again." He wasn't sure if he could speak publicly early on. He fought for justice because of personal pain, but after giving it some thought, he changed his mind. He understood that his story, even if it was a mean one, could move people. He agreed to attend the meeting that night because circumstances had changed. Marcus stood at the front of a crowded community center when it arrived. His heart pounded as he gazed out at the anxious expressions of his parents and activists. He took a big breath and got his thoughts together before he began his speech by saying, "Thank you all for being here tonight, and upset because, as you know, we're here because of something that happened between my daughter and one of them." "What happened to my daughter?" I asked a police officer I trusted to serve and protect this neighborhood. Was very personal, but it's also a part of a bigger problem that all of us have to deal with. The crowd listened in silence, their faces displaying expressions of anger and sadness. Marcus kept talking, his voice getting stronger with each word. When their children are in the care of someone who should be watching out for them, parents shouldn't have to worry about their safety. People who should protect children shouldn't scare them. Follow the rules, and no police officer should be able to abuse their authority without this. This caused the room to erupt in applause, with people shouting, "Agreed!" Looking out at the crowd, Marcus felt a rush of hope. He knew he wasn't alone in his fight for the community. Was there with him, and the two of them could charge change. When the meeting was over, a number of parents came up to Marcus and said he listened as they discussed their fears and feelings about getting help. With each story he heard, his resolution grew. This was not just about one person. The goal was to create a system that valued OP cops or a single event. Marcus returned that night with a sense of responsibility and fairness. He felt as though he had a purpose for the trip, one he hadn't had in a long time. He knew that the road ahead would be hard and there were still problems to solve. But he was ready to keep fighting for all children, not just Amina. Some people in his neighborhood felt more connected to each other after the talk. The community's reaction was overwhelming, with support pouring in with a sense of purpose and urgency. Marcus received support from teachers, parents, activists, and other concerned individuals. Dream for a safer future. The flood of emotions truly moved Marcus. Support. Amina's story no longer revolved solely around his family. I started a campaign that called for justice, responsibility, and openness. Marcus could feel the stress in the police force back at the station. As more proof came to light, the investigation into Dawson grew more serious. That showed his years of power abuse in a better and more disturbing way. Several reports and stories came out that showed how Dawson had used his power to control and scare people. Vulnerable individuals, particularly young girls from marginalized areas, are the focus of the testimonials. The images were eerie and depicted a man who had been hiding behind his badge for too long. One afternoon, Marcus got a call from Captain Harris, telling him he needed to come to the station right away. As soon as Marcus got there, he could feel the air officers' stress. They spoke quietly, their faces displaying a mixture of shock and disbelief as he continued on his familiar path. As he walked down the hall toward Harris's office, his heart was racing. "Come in." He spoke in a solemn tone as he closed the door behind them. Marcus took a seat, his eyes fixed on Harris as he waited for the news that we were done with. The Harris started his investigation, his face heavy with the weight of his impending words. Cher Dawson's bad behavior goes far beyond what we first thought we had. I discovered records of complaints that went unanswered, evidence that was overlooked, and statements that were not taken into account. He had been especially hoping for young black girls. Marcus was bitter and disgusted with the people who trusted him the most. He clenched his hands as he took in Harris's words. It was worse than he thought. Not only had Dawson's deeds broken lives, they had also betrayed the very Marcus took a deep breath and thought about the ideas of justice and safety that the badge stood for. Taking a moment to calm down before speaking, he asked, "So, what happens now?" With a tense voice, Harris looked him in the eye and said, "We've officially ended his relationship. Several charges, including misbehavior, abuse of power and endangerment, led to his firing and arrest. As we gather more evidence, the defendant is presenting a compelling case. It's likely that he'll have to go to jail for a long time." Marcus felt calm and joyful at the same time. Dawson's sentence was fair, but it wouldn't fix the damage he'd done. It wouldn't take away the fear he caused in his victims or the harm he did to the community. Trust me, it was a step in the right direction to improve. Harris kept up his strong voice, saying that this case has led to a decision. After carefully examining our internal systems, we are implementing new measures to ensure that issues are addressed. Once properly recorded and investigated, there will be no more missed warnings. Marcus expressed a sense of hope that things would improve. Though they were late, their arrival marked a significant step forward. His fight for justice had caused a change in the neighborhood. Marcus left the office with a promise to be honest and open, which he thought would protect future generations. Though the fight wasn't over, he couldn't help but feel a little lighter after the last few weeks. Dawson would be held responsible, which gave him some peace of mind after fighting for his daughter. He had pledged to defend his town and its principles despite the scar. He knew that night that he had made a difference. He got home to find Amina waiting for him in the living room. She had exhibited bravery throughout, and his strength enabled her to persevere. "Keep going, Daddy," even when it seemed like the journey would never end. Slowly, "Is it over? Is that man gone?" Marcus got on his knees and looked her in the eye. He nodded and said, "Yes, sweetheart, he won't. You will never hurt anyone again, and things will be better now that you've been through it. For other kids, people are listening and will make sure no one like him has the potential to inflict pain on others." Amina's face relaxed, and a small smile broke through. With fear still in her eyes, she gave him a tight hug and put her arms around his neck as he held her close. At that very moment, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. They got through the dark together, and he knew they would overcome anything. The station continued to implement the changes prompted by Amina's case in the weeks that followed. New rules were put in place, and cops got more training on how to be accountable. Morals and ethics led to a gradual restoration of people's trust in the police. They witnessed genuine efforts to bring about change. Amina's story moved them, lives of many people starting talks about trust and safety, and the Marcus knew how important it was to stand up for what was right. But despite the remaining tasks, he took pride in their accomplishments. Amina's bravery had changed their lives and given them hope. They walked through the park together one sunny afternoon, calling on the community to expect more. When she looked up at him, her face lit up with pure joy, which had come back after weeks of fear. Marcus looked down at her with a smile, his heart full of thanks. They had been through the dark times together and come out stronger, unbreakable, and as they walked on, Marcus knew that with Amina by his side, he would always have the strength to stand up for what was right. It all began on a day filled with optimism. Marcus's steadfast support turned the park into a shocking event that changed people's lives forever. Courage and drive won the day, and Amina's story served as a strong reminder. We should always look out for the weak and push those in power. Remember, this is not just one story, it's a call for all of us. If this story moved you, demand change and fight for what's right. Sign up for more important stories and let us know what you think in the comments below. Your vote matters. Let's continue to amplify voices that need to be heard and work towards creating a more just and equitable society. Together, we can make a difference and bring about positive change in our communities.